The wheels hit the tarmac with a hard jolt, and the familiar ding of the seatbelt sign echoed overhead. My phone, wedged between my knee and the armrest, buzzed. I'd sent the text before takeoff in Lisbon, right after saying goodbye to the last of my sister's friends at the small cafe near the church flight lands. At 4 p.m. can you pick me up? 16 hours of travel. 2 layovers. One heart still raw from watching my sister's casket lowered into the ground. The reply flashed on my screen before I even unlatched the belt. Figure it out. I read it twice, certain I'd missed something, some emoji, some explanation. But that was it. 2 words flat as stone. No sorry, no busy. Just a dismissal that sliced clean through whatever warmth I'd carried across the ocean. People all around me were standing, stretching, pulling down their luggage. A little boy 2 rows up was waving at his grandmother in the gate area, his grin wide and unguarded. I stayed seated, my hand still holding the phone. My suitcase. A silent wait in the overhead bin. When the aisle cleared, I walked off the plane into the bright chaos of the terminal. Every few steps, someone was rushing into an embrace. Laughter, tears, welcome home signs. My own pace was slow, deliberate, the pull handle of my suitcase clattering softly over the tile. Outside, the cool Bay Area air met me like a wall. I opened the rideshare app with fingers that felt strangely heavy, booked the first driver I saw, and stood under the pickup sign. My phone didn't buzz again. In the car, the driver tried for small talk, asking about my trip. I managed a polite smile and told him I'd been visiting family overseas. I didn't mention that half of that family was now buried in a plot outside Lisbon, or that the one person I had left here couldn't be bothered to drive 15 minutes to see me. When we pulled away from the airport, I looked out at the blur of freeway signs and knew this wasn't about a ride. Something had shifted, and I would need to face it soon. The ride home gave me too much time to think, and thinking always takes me backward before it moves me forward. Back to a small apartment with secondhand furniture where a little girl with tangled hair sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring while I hemmed a neighbor's dress. Back to nights when I left her sleeping under a hand-me-down quilt, locking the door behind me to clean offices until midnight, just to keep food in the fridge and the lights on. Seline was 7 when her father died. The accident was sudden, the kind that changes your breathing for months because you can't quite believe someone's heart just stopped beating in the middle of an ordinary day. I remember her looking up at me during the funeral, asking if everything was going to be okay. I said yes, though I didn't believe it yet myself. We scraped by, the 2 of us. I learned how to stretch a pot of soup for 3 days, how to find shoes at thrift stores that looked brand new, how to smile when the bills were paid late, but paid nonetheless. When she wanted to join the school's music program, I sold my gold wedding bracelet, one of the few valuable things I had left to cover the fee. She played clarinet for exactly 1 year before deciding she preferred soccer, and I paid for that too. I thought the sacrifices were invisible to her back then. Maybe they were. But when she graduated college, she hugged me and whispered, "I'll take care of you someday, Mom." I held on to those words longer than I should have. As her career grew, our conversations shrank. She was always in a meeting or about to catch a flight, yet she didn't hesitate to call when she needed help with rent during her early years in the city. I never said no. Sitting in my living room now, suitcase still by the door, I realized how far we'd drifted. The woman who once promised to take care of me had just told me to figure it out. And hours later, my phone lit up with a message that made that gap feel even wider. I had just set the kettle on when the doorbell rang. Mary Bell stood there with a small container of chicken soup, the kind she makes when she knows I've been through something. We settled at the kitchen table, steam rising between us, as she asked about Lisbon in her careful, gentle way. I told her what I could, without letting my voice crack, and she didn't push for more. Halfway through our bowls, my phone buzzed on the table. I almost ignored it, but the preview caught my eye, a message from an old friend who still lived near the airport. Saw Celine at Brew Point Cafe today. She looked happy. The words landed with a weight I didn't expect. Brew Point was 15 minutes from the terminal. At 4 in the afternoon, when I was dragging my suitcase past baggage claim, she'd been sipping coffee that close. I stared at the message, the edges of my vision narrowing. I'd told myself she might be tied up at work, maybe stuck across town. I wanted to believe there was a good reason. But this was worse. This was a choice. Maribel saw my face shift and asked what happened. I read the message aloud, my voice flat. She set her spoon down and leaned back, her lips pressing into a thin line. Neither of us spoke for a moment. It wasn't just this one thing. Little scenes began playing in my head, like someone flipping through a stack of old photographs. The birthday dinner she forgot to come to, the unanswered calls when my car broke down, the quick changes of subject whenever I mentioned visiting. Alone, each moment could be brushed aside. Together, they told a different story. I put the phone face down on the table and reached for my tea, trying to keep my hands steady. Whatever had shifted between us hadn't happened overnight. This had been building quietly while I was too busy excusing it. And a few weeks later, when her engagement invitation arrived, I knew exactly how much I was willing to ignore and how much I wasn't. The envelope was thick, the kind meant to impress. Inside was an invitation printed on cream cardstock with gold lettering. Join us in celebrating the engagement of Celine Crosswell and Garrick Sloan. No personal note, no quick phone call to say she hoped I could come. Just a date, a time, and a restaurant that I knew charged more per plate than I used to make in a week. I bought a simple dress from a boutique downtown, nothing flashy, just enough to feel appropriate. I wrapped a small crystal vase I'd found at an antique shop, delicate with a swirl pattern that caught the light, and brought it along in a gift bag. The restaurant was all warm lighting and hushed conversation. Celine spotted me near the entrance and walked over, her smile polite but clipped. "This is my mother, Valenia," she said to the couple beside her. "She's retired now." The pause before the word retired was small but sharp. I followed her to the table where Garrick's family sat. His parents were immaculate, her in pearls, him in a suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. They talked about skiing in Aspen, about their vineyard investments, about how Garrick's latest project had doubled its value in under a year. I listened, hands folded in my lap. When the waiter poured wine, Garrick leaned toward his father and said, "At least you don't have to worry about her finances," tilting his head slightly toward me. His tone was light, but my stomach tightened. How would he even know anything about my finances? I kept my expression neutral, letting the conversation drift on without me. I had learned long ago that silence could be more revealing than words. By the time dessert arrived, I'd decided I wouldn't let that comment slip away unanswered forever. But it wasn't the right moment, not yet. I smiled through the rest of the evening, the vase resting quietly under the table by my feet, already certain it would never sit in their home. And a memory from years earlier stirred, reminding me exactly why I'd never told Celine about the one thing I still kept entirely to myself. 5 years ago, before my knees began to ache on rainy mornings, I took the settlement from a workplace injury and did something I'd never done before. I invested in myself. Not in clothes, not in a car, not even in home repairs, but in a small coastal property, 2 hours south of Monterey. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a weathered clapboard cottage tucked behind windswept dunes. But the deed was in my maiden name, and that made all the difference. No one, especially Celine, knew about it. I rented it seasonally to travelers who liked the quiet, and the income trickled in steadily enough to keep the place in good repair. I kept the accounts separate, untouched by anything tied to my day-to-day bills. Maribel was the only one who knew. She'd been the one to help me review the paperwork, leaning across her cluttered desk and saying, "Keep this private. People you trust can change when they see a dollar sign." At the time, I thought she was being cynical. Now I wasn't so sure. I visited the cottage a few times a year sometimes, just for a day. I'd sit on the back porch with a book, listening to the ocean crash against the shore. It felt like mine in a way nothing else had since I'd paid off my first apartment. After the airport incident and the engagement dinner, I found myself thinking about the cottage more often, about what it represented, a piece of my life that hadn't been scrutinized, diminished, or controlled by anyone else. Seline might believe she had a full picture of my life, but this was one corner she had never seen. And the more I replayed Garrick's offhand comment, the more I realized how dangerous it could be if she ever did. I wasn't ready to draw lines in the sand yet, but I could feel the tide shifting inch by inch. And then one afternoon, the phone rang with a request that made those lines appear all at once. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Seline called. Her voice was brisk, like she was checking an errand off a list. "Mom, I need you to sign some routine paperwork. It'll add Garrick's name to your condo, just for insurance purposes. Makes things easier if something happens." I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle. "Why would that make things easier for me?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She gave a small laugh, the kind meant to smooth over a crack. "It's just a formality. Everyone does it. We're family." "I'd still like to have Maribel look it over," I said. The pause on the other end stretched just a little too long. "You don't trust us, I didn't say that. I just believe in understanding what I'm signing." Her voice sharpened. "You've always been suspicious. Garrick and I are trying to make sure you're taken care of, but you make everything difficult." I could hear the clink of glass in the background, the murmur of other voices. She wasn't alone, and that made her tone bolder. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. "We can talk about it another time." There was a quick inhale, then the flat click of the call ending. The room felt quieter than before, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it down on the table. For years, I'd brushed off little slights, choosing peace over confrontation. But this wasn't a forgotten phone call or a missed dinner. This was about control over where I lived, over what I owned, over me. I poured myself a glass of water, the coolness grounding me. My hand didn't shake. I realized I wasn't angry so much as resolved. If she wanted to treat my life like an asset, then I needed to decide exactly who that asset belonged to. The next morning, I called Maribel and asked if she had time to meet in her office. Maribel's office was a narrow room above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread drifting in as I climbed the stairs. She greeted me with that steady look of hers, the one that told me I could speak freely here. I laid it all out: the engagement dinner, Garrick's comment, and now the phone call about adding his name to my condo. She listened without interrupting, only nodding from time to time. When I finished, she reached for a folder already sitting on her desk. "I think it's time we put your affairs in order on your terms," she said. We reviewed my will line by line. The cottage by the coast, the separate investment account, even a few personal heirlooms I'd tucked away, all of it would be transferred into a trust earmarked for a women's support foundation. My name would remain on the deeds and accounts until the day I was gone, but the succession plan would be locked. Celine's name disappeared from the inheritance page with a single stroke of Maribel's pen. In its place, the trust would ensure those assets helped people who actually needed them. I initialed each change, the paper smooth beneath my fingertips. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic flourish, just ink drying on a truth I'd known for weeks now. When we finished, Maribel slid the documents into a thick envelope and set it aside for filing. "It's done," she said simply. I felt no guilt, only a quiet release. She had made her choices, and I was making mine. We sat for a few minutes more, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs, talking about nothing of consequence. The decisions had been made. The rest could wait. When I left, the bakery's door chimed below and sunlight spilled across the sidewalk. I walked toward my car, feeling lighter than I had in months, my steps unhurried. 2 days later, Seline showed up at my door without warning, her tone sharp before she even crossed the threshold. She didn't bother with small talk. "Why haven't you been answering my calls?" Seline demanded, stepping inside like she owned the place. "I've been busy," I said, moving toward the kitchen. "Is something wrong?" Her eyes narrowed. "Garrick's friend was at the county office last week. He saw your name on the deed to some coastal property. You never told me about it." I kept my tone even. "Because it's mine, and it's not for sale." She blinked, then gave a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You're seriously keeping secrets from your own daughter. Do you know what that place could do for us financially? For you and Garrick, you mean?" Her cheeks flushed. "We're family. Family shares. I've been trying to make sure you're taken care of, but you keep acting like I'm out to get something from you." I didn't move. Didn't raise my voice. "Seline, I've taken care of myself for a very long time. I don't need your help deciding what happens to my property." She folded her arms, shifting her weight like she was bracing for a fight. "You're being stubborn. One day you'll regret shutting me out." "I'm not shutting you out," I said quietly. "I'm just not handing over my life to someone else to manage." The silence stretched between us sharp enough to cut. I could see her calculating her next move, the way her jaw tightened before she reached for her purse. "Fine," she said, turning toward the door. "But don't be surprised when this attitude comes back to bite you." I didn't follow her out. The door clicked shut, and the room settled into stillness again. Standing there, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Seline wasn't the type to let something go once she'd decided it was hers to claim. So when her next invitation arrived, a request to talk things over at a cafe downtown, I had a feeling I'd be walking into something more than just a conversation. The cafe was all warm wood and soft music, the kind of place meant to lower defenses. Seline was already seated at a corner table, her phone face down, beside a neatly folded napkin. She waved me over, but I didn't come alone. Maribel walked in with me, her briefcase in hand, followed by a woman representative from the trust I'd named in my will. Celine's smile faltered the moment she saw them. "I thought this was just between us," she said. "It still is," I replied, taking my seat. "They're here to make sure everything is clear." Maribel slid a folder across the table. "All of Valenia's assets have been legally transferred to an irrevocable trust. They're not for sale, and they can't be reassigned." Celine's eyes darted to me, then back to Maribel. "You're serious? You'd rather give everything to strangers than your own daughter." "They're not strangers," I said, calmly. "They're women who've been where I've been, and they'll use it to survive, not to leverage or control someone else's life." She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Garrick appeared at her shoulder. He must have been waiting outside. His easy grin vanished as he scanned the documents, the truth settling over him in an instant. "There's nothing here for us," he muttered, half to Seline, half to himself. Seline pushed her chair back, the legs scraping the floor. "You're making a huge mistake." "Maybe," I said, "but it's mine to make." The trust representative gathered the papers, tucking them neatly into her case. Maribel stood, and I followed. As we walked out into the crisp afternoon air, I felt no triumph, only a steady certainty. Whatever storm Seline had tried to stir, it had passed without touching what mattered. And a week later, when the phone rang again and her name lit the screen, I already knew exactly what I was going to say. When I answered, her voice was tight, like she was holding something back. "I just think we should try again," Seline said. "We've both said things we didn't mean." "I meant what I said," I replied. "And I think you did too." She hesitated, then sighed. "So that's it. You're cutting me off. I'm protecting what's mine. There's a difference." I kept my tone steady, not unkind, but final. You've built your own life, Seline. You have the resources, the network, the drive. You don't need mine, and I don't need someone else deciding what's best for me. She didn't answer right away. I could hear traffic in the background, the muffled hum of the city. Finally, she said, "You've changed." "No," I said. I just stopped pretending not to see what was in front of me. There was a long pause before she hung up. No goodbye. I set the phone down and turned toward the window. The afternoon light stretched across the floor, warm and unbroken. For the first time in a long while, I felt the space around me was truly my own. The next weekend, I drove down to the cottage. The air smelled of salt and wild sage, the waves folding and unfolding in their endless rhythm. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and opened every window. Sunlight poured through, carrying the sound of the ocean with it. I spent the afternoon arranging fresh flowers in the kitchen, stacking wood by the fireplace and making tea. The quiet here wasn't empty. It was full, holding every choice I'd made to get to this point. As the sky deepened toward evening, I sat on the porch with my cup, watching the tide pull out. Somewhere beyond the horizon, planes were crossing oceans. People were arriving home, phones were buzzing with invitations or silences. But here, in this moment, I was exactly where I chose to be on my terms in my place and with nothing left to prove.